Many people have claimed over the years to have been abducted by aliens, and realistically there's no tangible evidence that any human being has ever actually set foot in an extraterrestrial spacecraft or another dimension or anything like that. It's just these crazy stories from people that claim this happened to them. And while many of these stories are very quickly cast aside as absolute hoax, not true, not accurate, there's one story, one abduction story that is universally regarded as the most believable and most famous alien abduction story, and that is of Travis Walton. What made this case so famous is that unlike all of the other alien abduction cases where there was never any proof, it was usually one person's first-hand account. In this case, you have a full-scale police investigation. You have up to 16 lie detector tests that were taken by Travis Walton himself, along with the other witnesses and people that were there. And you have a group of 6 level-headed guys that actually witnessed the abduction take place and have stuck to their story and have passed all lie detector tests and have never changed their story in 40 years. And you would think that at some point you might change your story because they came under incredible scrutiny. I mean, it basically derailed most of their careers and their lives because they were labeled as crazy people for believing that a UFO had abducted Travis Walton. I mean, in a way, they became famous, but in all the worst ways. So you have all these elements that make this story seem fairly credible. And even if this wasn't an alien abduction, let's say, how do you account for the past lie detector tests that are talking about UFOs? How do you account for the fact that Travis Walton was really missing for 5 days and has no idea where he was? And there was a full search effort to find him in the area where he would have been. So lots of unanswered questions, but the story itself of when he was actually abducted, and then his own story about what happened once he had been abducted, it makes for just an incredible story. It's been converted into books and movies, and to this day, it remains one of, if not the single most fascinating purported alien abduction stories ever. But before we get into today's story, if you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, well then you've come to the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3 to 4 of these stories every week. So if that's something that interests you, I would encourage you to gently extirpate the like button and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's dive into the story. By 1975, Travis Walton, who was 22 years old at the time, had developed a bad boy reputation in his hometown of Snowflake, Arizona. He rode a noisy Harley-Davidson motorcycle through town. He was a wild bull rider, and he was a boxer. And there was a story about Travis when he was with his friends in a car and they were driving down this road and a bear jumped out of the woods and landed in the middle of the road and was just standing there. And Travis, without any hesitation, leaps out of his car and chases after this huge bear and scares it into the woods, and in fact chased it up into the woods. So Travis was just known as this kind of rebel, problem child a little bit, but he was beloved by his friends. He was just like one of those cool guys that he did it his own way. So Travis and the 6 other men that he worked with were loggers. They were given contracts and they would go out and they would clear trees in a certain area. They were not big time with huge equipment to do this. We're talking chainsaws, saw and regular saws and axes. And they would just go out, these blue collar, like hard working type guys, and they would clear areas of trees. That's what they did. Now these 7 men, they did a dangerous job. I mean, you're cutting down these huge trees and you're usually working pretty quickly. You're operating, chainsaws that are pretty dangerous. And Mike Rogers, who was the crew boss, who was there the day of this event, he described in a number of his interviews that, the men that he hired to do these jobs, they needed to be incredibly level-headed. They did not strike you as people that would have this fantastical, alien encounter story. On November 5th, 1975, Mike Rogers was given a contract to clear out this huge 1,200-acre plot of land inside of the Sitgreaves National Forest. And he grabbed his crew, they piled into the one pickup truck that Mike owned, and Mike knew that this was going to be a really really difficult job. It was a huge area to cover, and he told his men up front, we're gonna be working really, really hard, so expect long, full days. And so over the first 3 days of the job, even though they were working, long hours and barely taking any breaks, they were behind schedule. At the end of this third day, it's late at night, they've worked all day, and everybody is just totally exhausted. And so finally they wrap up, and they all pile back into Mike's truck, all 7 of them, and they start driving the access road back down to the main road to get back to the town. And as they're driving, they're not really talking about work at all. They're kind of joking about what they're going to do that night. And as they're driving down the road, and again, it's heavily forested, they look off to the right, and there is some lights in the forest. They would say in interviews that they all noticed it, but it did not stand out as anything particularly bad. It just could be anything. They weren't thinking about it. But as they were driving down this road, and this light, I guess, got brighter, or maybe they couldn't help but notice it, they all started commenting on this light, and they're looking at it, and somebody suggested that, oh, it's probably just the moon, it's a full moon. But then one of the guys on the other side of the truck happened to look out his side, away from where that light was, and he goes, no, the moon's over here, it's on this side of the road. So they're like, okay, it's not the moon. And then someone suggested, oh, well, maybe it's a forest fire. Like, maybe we should go check it out, that could be a forest fire. But then Mike Rogers, the driver, the crew boss, was like, no, there'd be smoke, there's no smoke or anything. And Travis, who, he's the guy that's jumping out of cars to go chase down bears, and he's like a total kind of adrenaline junkie type. He's like, hey, let's just drive over there and see what it is. Like, I don't know, it could be anything. Let's go check it out. The guys in the truck were a little on edge about it, but ultimately said, what's the harm? We'll drive over. We know there's a road that brings us over to that section of the forest. We'll get a look at whatever this is, and then we'll leave. So they drive down this other little access road, and they come to a clearing where these lights were, and they are astounded at what they see. They were all polygraphed separately about what they saw when they reached this clearing. Each of them described the same thing with slightly different details because it's from their own perspective. And the polygraph tests all showed that they were telling the truth. They saw this disc-shaped craft with what looked like panels of lights on the underside, hovering in a clearing, maybe 50 or 100 feet off the ground, not spinning or anything, just floating in midair, as if it was suspended. And the men, in their interviews later on TV shows and books, they would say what struck them was not just the fact that there's this craft here, but how bizarre it was to see this thing defying gravity. It's not moving, but it's hovering over the air, and it's right in front of us. And one of the men even commented at length, because he would build houses, and he was a handy guy. And he started talking about the structural framework of this craft. He could see that there was really impressive engineering on the underside of this craft. It was just a beautiful, beautiful machine. And they're looking at it, and Travis is so excited when they get to this clearing. He doesn't even know what he's looking at, but much like the bear, where he jumps out and chases the bear, as soon as they were almost at a stop in this clearing right next to the ship, he's jumping out of the car. Nobody else is, just Travis. And he starts walking just a little ways away from the car towards this craft. The craft doesn't move. The craft is maybe from where they parked, maybe 50 or 100 feet away from them, and then 50 or 100 feet in the air. And the crew doesn't say anything. They're just dumbfounded by what they're looking at. Travis is also dumbfounded, but he's walking towards the ship. And he would say in an interview that he was frightened, but he was mostly curious. He knew he was looking at something that no one knew what it was. Some sort of craft, they didn't know what it was, but it was fascinating to him, and he kept walking closer and closer and closer to it. And as the crew kind of came out of their initial shock of seeing this unidentified flying object in the sky, they start yelling for Travis to come back. They had this bad sense that something was going to happen, and they thought you shouldn't go near it, like, come back. Not to mention it's hovering in the air. What if it falls and it lands on you? Like, hey, Travis, come back over here. And then it was like once one person started yelling for Travis to come back, they all did. And so Travis remembered hearing them screaming for him to come back to the car, but he's not really paying any attention. He's still walking. And finally he stops. He's just looking at it. And Travis would say he was just struck at just the beauty of the underside of this craft with all these different panels of lights built into it. It was this incredible piece of machinery. And he's looking at it, and then all of a sudden it starts spinning. just a little bit, and it starts emitting this noise that all of them reported hearing, this loud mechanical sound. And now the yells from the crew are getting louder and louder, and Travis would say that he knew he needed to turn around and go back, but he just wanted to look for a few more seconds, and he was about to turn and go back to the truck when all of a sudden a beam of light comes out and strikes Travis like a lightning strike. And all of the crew saw this happen. He gets blown 20 feet away. Like, he gets lifted off the ground and thrown 20 feet. And they watched it happen. And again, in all of their polygraph tests, they all said the same thing. All passed. He was hit by a ray of light from this UFO, knocked him 20 feet back. Mike Rogers, in a panic, along with everybody else in the crew, they just decide to leave. And they're convincing themselves, as Mike is driving away like a maniac, leaving Travis behind, they're convincing themselves that he's dead already. We just watched him get shot by something. We don't know what that is. And they're freaked out. They don't even know what they saw. They're crying. They're hysterical. These are grown men, just absolutely terrified. And they're driving a little ways until finally Mike just hits the brakes and he stops. And Mike is like, we have to go back for him. He was like, if you guys want to stay here and wait for me, that's fine, but this truck is going back to get Travis. And so the idea of waiting out in the open after seeing what they just saw was even worse than going back. They wanted to stay together, so a little bit begrudgingly, although they knew they needed to, they all got back in the truck, turned around, and started driving back up to the UFO site. As they make it back up, they notice that there is no lights up there. You know, the craft is gone, and there's no Travis. And they get out, and now Mike is uncontrollably crying because he feels like they just abandoned him, and where did he go? Everybody else is in shock. They can't believe it. They start screaming for Travis. They're running around the woods, yelling for Travis, looking for signs of Travis. They really don't know what happened, but they know Travis is not here. And after a little bit of time of looking, they're like, we have to tell the police. And they knew that it was going to be bad for them when they told police. The story is, a UFO came and zapped Travis and now he's gone. That doesn't really sit well with police. But they knew, because they wanted to find Travis and they were very concerned about their friend, they knew they had to tell police. Mike and a few of the other crew were just unable to even think. They were crying, they were upset, and so finally they get to a payphone, the first payphone they saw, because this is 1975, and Ken Peterson, who was this very kind of simple, matter-of-fact guy, you know, recently married, just very simple guy, very level-headed guy. He decides to call the police because he's the only one who was, I guess, composed enough to do it. And so he calls the sheriff's department and he says, you got to come out here. You know, we can't find our friend Travis Walton. We'll have to describe it to you when you get here, because trying to do it over the phone is not going to do it justice. But he's gone and we don't know where he went. So shortly thereafter, Sheriff Marlon Gillespie and Ken Copeland, their partners, they show up at this rest stop where this payphone was, and they get to the scene. They see Ken Peterson, who made the call to them, and they're like, all right, tell us what's going on. The crew has now gotten out of the truck. They look distraught for sure. And Ken begins to try to describe what happened, but he hasn't said UFO, he hasn't said aliens, he's just said, we were up at the logging site, we had a contract up there, and then, just, it's hard to describe, and Mike Rogers jumps in, he's like, we saw a UFO, and a ray of light hit Travis, and then he disappeared. And the sheriffs are looking at them like, really? And so they stopped them and were like, all right, I need to search your truck to make sure you guys aren't under the influence of something. And they're like, we haven't done anything. We've been working all day. They search the truck, nothing. They check each of them to see if they're sober, and their field test showed they were all sober. And the Sheriff Gillespie, who was the overall in charge sheriff, even though he was a total skeptic, and so was Sheriff Copeland as well, he would say about that first engagement with the 6 crew members that they were obviously shaken up by something. Something had happened. They don't know what it was, but they were shaken up. And what Sheriff Gillespie believed was that they were creating a hoax to cover up a real crime. He believed that they had harmed Travis Walton and they were using a UFO to cover it up. But he also was thinking to himself, like, this is a bad hoax. It's not very well planned. They don't really have their stories really lined up particularly well. They're not doing a good job explaining it. The only thing they're doing well is acting scared. A couple hours later, the sun's starting to come up because it was super late when all this happened. And Sheriff Gillespie and Sheriff Copland have organized this huge search effort up in the forest where Travis had gone missing. And the crew members, they're all there as well. A bunch of volunteers showed up and they are scouring the area. I mean, they got dogs out, they got these huge teams looking everywhere, and they can't come up with anything. I mean, they're looking everywhere, there's no sign, there's nothing. There's nothing from Travis. And so while this is all going on, Sheriff Copland and Sheriff Gillespie have started coming over to Mike Rogers and the rest of the crew and being like, hey, if you just tell us where Travis Walton's body is, like, we'll go easy on you guys. Like, we know you did it. And they can feel that the pressure is really mounting, that they don't find Travis. Even though they didn't do anything, according to their story, they're going to face serious repercussions because that's the way the world works. You don't get to say aliens did this and not have any blame placed on you because there's no proof. They just have their own eyewitness testimony. That's it. And so the crew has started to become very worried about what's going to happen. They're worried about Travis, of course, but they're starting to see that, like, they're going to be prosecuted for this unless they find Travis. And so they're all very stressed out. And they noticed during the search, this first day of searching, that these three guys wearing red jackets had these tools that were scanning the ground, almost like a metal detector. And Mike Rogers, he was hoping that during this investigation that they would have people come out that were like paranormal investigators. I guess maybe he was naive to think that the police would actually do that. But he thought, given the fact that we've all said this is a UFO that zapped Travis, who then disappeared, that they would have at least one person representing the kind of paranormal side of the investigation coming out. And so he sees these guys in red with their special tools that seem like a metal detector, and his gut says they're paranormal investigators. And so Mike goes over to them and he's like, hey, what are these tools you guys are doing? Like, what is this? And they look at him and they're like, oh, well, this tests for radiation. We're scanning for radiation in the area. And he asked them, like, well, what group are you guys with? Are you with the sheriff's department? And they just didn't really answer him. They said, oh, we're just checking for radiation in the area. That's just what we do. And Mike sees an opportunity because when that ship emitted that ray of light that ultimately blew Travis Walton 20 feet and then, evaporated him or something, they were within range of that big ball of lightning, and they were very much in the kind of cone where, had there been radiation coming off of that ship, he believed that perhaps they would have been hit with it. And so he asked the guys with the red jackets on and their little radiation tools to scan the crew's jackets and bodies to see if they were radioactive. And so the crew comes over and they scan them and there's nothing. There's no trace elements of radioactivity. They're like, no, there's nothing. And then Mike realizes that from the time they called the sheriff until this search, they had all the crew gone home and changed, then come out to do this search. And so he thought, well, then, any of the radioactive materials would have been on our clothes, which aren't here, but we have our hard hats in the back of the truck that were out here the whole time. They were potentially exposed to whatever was out there from the ship. Can you test those? And so he brought over one of their helmets, and the guy in red scans his helmet and the ticker goes all the way over, fully radioactive. And the guy in red looked up at Mike and looked down at the helmet, and he's scanning it and he's looking at him, kind of trying to size him up. And then he turns and he kind of gestures at the other two in red and tells them to stop doing what they're doing. And they come over and they're scanning the helmets as well. And then without any indication of what the results were, what this meant, because Mike is kind of waiting for them to tell them what's going to happen, the guys in red just turn around and say, okay. And they just start walking away. And Mike's like, well, wait, what does this mean? And they don't turn around and they just walk away from the search site. And so the other crew are watching this happen too. And Mike and the crew are trying to get them to come back, but they're not turning around. They're just leaving and then they're gone. And so Mike goes over to the sheriffs, who they know the sheriffs think they did something to Travis. These are not their friends, but they figured we need to ask them who those guys in red were. So they go over to Sheriff Gillespie and they're like, hey, who are those guys in red jackets with the radiation detectors? And Sheriff Gillespie's like, who? There's no one here looking for radiation. Everyone here is here because I ordered them to be here. Who are they? Where are they? And he's like, well, they just walked over there. They went around the corner there. And Sheriff Gillespie's like, well, I didn't order them there. And it would turn out that they couldn't locate these three people. No one knew who they were. Mike went around and asked anybody who seemed like an authority figure if they knew who these people were. They asked people if they had interacted with them, and no one knew. So after this search that goes on for a couple of days, turns up nothing, there's no sign of Travis, the town of Snowflake, Arizona really turned on the 6 crew members. Everybody believed that they had done something to Travis, that this UFO thing was a hoax and that they harmed Travis and they were using this as a cover-up. And the sheriff department, they really perpetuated that. They were pretty open about, this is not a UFO situation, this is not an alien abduction, this is a missing person case, and frankly, we believe the UFO thing is a hoax. National and international media had picked this story up, and it became this massively viral story all over the world. And news media outlets are converging on Snowflake, Arizona, and they're inundating the sheriff's department with requests for more information about this alien abduction, and it's really frustrating the 2 sheriffs who were leading this investigation, Sheriff Gillespie and Sheriff Copland. And they were already skeptical and really upset about feeling like they were being taken advantage of by these crew members, this hoax, right? That's what they believed it was. And so Sheriff Gillespie and Copland decide, you know what, we're gonna just cut through all the BS here and we're gonna make these boys take a lie detector test. So they go out and get one of the country's best polygraph examiners to come in and administer a lie detector test on each of the 6 crew members. And so one by one over the course of the day, each crew member was tested for 2 hours, same questions, all centering on the criminal side, the kind of foul play angle for Travis Walton. They all go through it. And it turned out that 5 of the 6 had all shown that they were telling the truth. And the 6th person, it was just inconclusive. It didn't mean that he was lying. It just meant that the test wasn't done very well. And this polygraph examiner had anywhere from a 92 to 98% accuracy rate. He was one of the best in the country. And he even would say, it would be so difficult to fake that. To have 5 people, let's say this is all a big hoax and they harmed Travis Walton. It would be almost impossible to have 5 people be able to pass my examination and have nobody slip up. They were telling the truth. And so the examiner tells the sheriff, and Sheriff Gillespie is dumbfounded because he believed that they were going to find out they were all lying and that this could just be a pure criminal investigation and it would be, let's go find Travis Walton's body. But now the examiner is saying they're telling the truth. And so Detective Gillespie and his partner are like, now what do we do? And then 5 days after Travis's disappearance, Travis shows back up. During numerous interviews, Travis would say that he remembers waking up on a road and he didn't recognize where he was, but it was nighttime, it was raining, and he sensed a very bright light above him. And so as he's laying, he kind of turns his head to look up into the sky and he sees what looks like the underside of that ship, because he remembered how struck he was by the beauty of the kind of engineering underneath that disc UFO they saw in the forest. It looked the same. His vision was not great, but he's looking up and he's pretty confident that's what he's looking at. And then it flies into the sky and it's gone. And he's left in total darkness on a road in some place he doesn't know. And he remembers standing up and feeling very weak and depleted and dehydrated. And he just knew that he had to get to civilization. He had to just go in a direction and find someone who could help him because he was so weak and he would die out there if he didn't find someone who could help. And so he musters his strength to stand up and he starts kind of staggering down the road. And eventually, through just adrenaline, he just starts running. And luckily, he sees up ahead there is a rest stop. And at rest stops, there's payphones. And he makes his way down and he goes to the payphone and he has change in his pocket still. He puts it in the payphone and he ends up calling his brother. And his brother he can't believe he's talking to Travis because Travis is probably supposed to be dead at this point. He didn't believe it was Travis, but Travis just said to him over and over again, "It's me. They brought me back." And he tells him where he is because now he recognizes that this rest stop is actually in Snowflake, Arizona. When his brother picks him up, Travis would say that he believed that this was just minutes after, the initial abduction. He didn't even know he had been abducted. This is like he's coming to and he's like, man, what happened? Like I was just over at that clearing where I saw this ship and now I'm over here. Like, what am I doing here? And so Travis's brother is looking at him like, where have you been? We've been so worried about you for the past several days. And Travis, who was kind of almost catatonic, he's in shock. He doesn't know what's going on. He looks at his brother and he's like, what do you mean days? And his brother's like, you've been missing for 5 days. And so Travis would say that when he heard this news, this revelation that he had been missing for 5 days, it absolutely put him into shock. He was in a catatonic state where he couldn't make sense of it, and so he just sat there quietly. And his brother's looking at him, not really sure what to even ask. He asked a couple times what happened, and Travis just didn't answer because he didn't know. He couldn't explain it. And so Travis's brother decides, instead of just immediately calling the police, I want to bring you to a hospital because clearly that needs to happen. And frankly, with the media circus, as soon as they find out you're back, it's just going to be mayhem, and I want to make sure you're taken care of first. So he drives to Phoenix, Arizona, and he brings him to a hospital. And he asked the doctors to be discreet, and he has a doctor do an examination. The doctor knew who Travis Walton was because he'd been following the news. And he's doing an examination of Travis, and he was malnourished and he was tired and looked very sick. But there was no physical wounds, with the exception of he had one puncture site in his arm, in the crook of his arm. Travis was not a drug user, so it wasn't like that was, a mark from using drugs. It was a puncture site, and they assumed someone had recently put a needle in his arm. And also the doctor drug tested him and tested his blood, and there was no drugs in his system. It wasn't like he had been using any sort of substance. So he kind of had a clear bill of health, minus the injection site and looking pretty ragged. And so after the examination, Travis's brother brings Travis back to his home in Phoenix, Arizona. As soon as they get back, his home phone is getting constant phone calls. It had made its way to the sheriff's department back in Snowflake, Arizona, and they are nonstop calling Travis's brother. Hey, we hear he's back. We have to talk to him. We have to talk to him. Sheriff Gillespie, he drives all the way to Phoenix. He goes in and he sits down to talk to Travis. And Sheriff Gillespie would say that Travis looked like he was in shock. He looked like he had been through something traumatic. It did not seem like he was acting. And he starts asking Travis what happened. And Travis, he does mention the UFO. He mentions seeing this thing in a clearing. He gets struck by some light. He doesn't know what it was. And then, he's on the road 5 days later, and he can't really make sense of what happened. He just didn't really know what happened over the 5 days. And finally, Sheriff Gillespie just kind of doesn't really give up. He's like, well, we have no way to arrest him. We have no proof of anything. And so we decided we're going to be in touch, and he drives back. And then media starts showing up. Huge news trucks start showing up outside. Everybody found out, because this was a huge story, where he was, and everybody wanted answers. Finally, the National Enquirer, they reached out and they said, hey, if you give us an exclusive story, if Travis speaks to us about what happened to him, we will get you out of here, we'll bring you to a private location, and we'll even pay to have Travis undergo a whole other battery of tests that are not typically done to see if they could figure out what had happened to him. And so they agree to go with the National Enquirer. So by the time he's actually sitting there looking at the National Enquirer, he's had a little bit of time to maybe let his memory kind of kick back in about what had happened. And he's having these flashes of memory of what happened over those 5 days. Because initially all he could remember was seeing the craft and then being on the road 5 days later. And so when he's sitting down with the National Enquirer people, he begins to recall what actually happened over those 5 days. And so this is what he said happened. He said that he remembers getting out of the truck and walking up to this craft. And he remembers his crew members yelling at him to come back. He knew they were yelling at him to come back. He just wanted to look at the craft a little bit longer. And then right as he was about to turn around and head back, the craft started moving. This loud kind of mechanical, eerie sound is being made. And before he had a chance to run back, he gets hit with this lightning bolt of some kind. Then he remembers being in the presence of some doctors. He saw white lab coats, masks, and facial coverings, and he's kind of in and out of consciousness, and he's this orange light around him, but he definitely sees what looks like medical professionals, and he's thinking to himself, whatever happened with that ship, it must have hurt me, and my crew must have scooped me up and brought me to the hospital. And so in his kind of in and out state, he's aware that he's around medical professionals, at least what he believes are medical professionals. And at some point, his vision clears. It goes from foggy and he's in and out to being pretty much lucid. And he looks down at his chest, and there's a rectangular box sitting on his chest that he didn't recognize. It didn't really look like modern medical equipment. It just looked like this almost like rock sitting on his chest. And he looks at that, and then he looks up at one of the people who's wearing a mask, who's working on him, one of the medical professionals. And this person is working on this box, and then the person looks at Travis Walton and then leans in to look even closer at Travis Walton, and Travis is horrified. It was this grayish, thin, narrow-headed figure that was very short, maybe like 4 feet high, who was looking in at him, and its eyes were like slits, and it's looking at Travis. And Travis, who's unbelievably scared at this point, pushes everything off of him and rips out all the cords that are attached to him. He kind of topples off of this table that he was on, and he realizes he's in a fairly small room, and there's 3 of these humanoid creatures in the room with him. And he picks up the biggest instrument he can see next to the table that he was just laying on. He didn't know what it was, and he starts kind of wildly waving it at them and screaming to leave him alone, like, get away from me. And he's trying to make sense of what he's looking at, and the 3 figures in lab coats start walking closer and closer to him. And they're just kind of looking up at him, trying to study him a little bit. They get all the way up to him, and he's waving, and he's almost about to hit one of them when they just kind of abruptly turn around and leave the room, leaving him alone in this kind of examination room. And as soon as they leave, he watches them go down the little, outside the door, down the little hallway, and they turn left. And so he's practically paralyzed with fear, but he knows if he can't get out of this room, he's done for. And so finally, he kind of gets himself together and he walks past the examination table. He goes down the hallway outside of the door, and instead of going left where they went, he kind of sneaks off to the right and starts walking. And he comes to another room, and it's a room that has a single chair in it. It's this tiny little room with a chair, and the chair is turned away from him. He begins to peer around the chair, and he sees that no one is sitting there. So he goes in front of the chair, and he's like touching the wall, looking for a doorknob or any sort of mechanism that can get him out of this room. And he said, like, the room, it was like this perfectly flat. Everything was flat and smooth. There was no door handles. He couldn't find a way out. And he ultimately sees on the chair that it looks like there's some buttons on the chair itself. And he pushes all these buttons on the chair and nothing happens. And then in the doorway where he came in, suddenly a person, a man, appears in the doorway, who's wearing what looks like a spacesuit, like an astronaut suit. And Travis is so immediately relieved, even though the weirdness of him being in an astronaut suit is pretty high. But he's like, it's a human. And he doesn't know what to think about the fact that he's now excited to see a human, right? Like, it's terrifying that you were just around these non-humans, but he's like in panic mode now. He sees another human being and he runs over to him and he says, please, you gotta help me. I don't know where I am. You know, where are we? What is this? What's going on? And he notices that the eyes of this person inside of the spacesuit, it's a man who at least looks like a man, but his eyes are distant. He's not making eye contact with Travis. It's like he's in a trance. And he said his eyes just seemed off, like they weren't focused on him. It would be like if you're talking to someone, but they were like permanently looking away from you. There was just something off about him, and he never spoke. And so he's trying to ask this guy, like, where are we? And the guy takes him by the arm, and he just starts leading him back into the hall where he came from, and continued down the hall, not back towards the room where he was originally, but down the hall in the other direction. And they get to another door, and he opens it up, and Travis the whole time is like pleading with this guy to help him. And he thinks that this guy is helping him. He thinks that this is his savior. And he feels relieved that a human being, albeit a strange human being, is helping him. And eventually he stops asking him any questions because the guy in the spacesuit's just not reacting to him. They open this door and they go down into this huge hangar where there's all these spacecraft that look just like the one that he saw in the clearing, that Travis saw in the clearing. And they start walking down between all these spacecraft that are just hovering, much like they were hovering in the forest, seemingly able to just defy gravity. And the whole time, this guy in the spacesuit's saying nothing, and Travis is like, what is this? What are these craft? Is this military? Saying nothing. They walk to the far side of the hangar, and they open up another door, and they go into another, this bright white room, and there's 3 more human-like people with the strange eye thing going on in spacesuits that are standing there next to another medical table, and they're looking not at Travis, but their bodies are aimed in the direction of the door they came in through. Travis goes in, and he sees these 3, and he thinks, these people are here to save me. Like, again, I feel relieved to see humans, albeit strange humans, but nonetheless humans. And the guy who had brought him in there continues to lead him over to the 3 other people, and they pick him up and they put him on the table. And he starts kind of resisting because he doesn't know what they're doing. They're not speaking. He's like, what are you doing? And they force him onto this table, and he's feeling pretty weak at this point. And they take a gas mask and they put it over his face. And then he blacks out. And this next memory after that is when he woke up on the road and had the light above him that flew away, and he had to run down to the payphone to call his brother. Travis did not immediately go and speak to the crew members that were there that night. It took quite a bit of time. He was talking to press, he was, doing interviews, the police wanted to talk to him. There's a lot going on, but he eventually got together with the other 6 crew members, and they all met up at Mike Rogers, the crew boss's house, and they just said, "You got to tell us what happened." And so he sits down and he tells the story. All of them believed him. They didn't want to believe him, but they believed him because they saw the first half of the story. They saw it for themselves. And once he was done telling it, they didn't really have that many questions. They just felt bad. They felt like if they had just stayed there and taken Travis, he wouldn't have been taken, but they didn't know that. And so all of them would leave Mike's house that day, and they would all go their separate ways. They did not stay in touch. They went their separate ways. It was like this hugely traumatic event that even to this day, 40 plus years later, when they talk about it, they're often brought to tears. Ken Peterson, his interviews are particularly striking because when he talks about it, he's an older man now. And he says, to this day, I'm scared to look out my window because I'm afraid I'm going to see a spaceship. And he starts crying when he talks about it. I mean, this had a profound impact on these 7 men. And some of them didn't do so well. This whole story, it ruined their credibility. Even though this is the most believable alien abduction story, the truth is most people think it's a hoax. One of them, like his own family, basically disowned him because they felt so embarrassed about this whole story. They don't believe him. So if this was a hoax, like to what end? What did they get out of it? Nothing. It damaged their lives. Following this case over the span of 40 years, there would be 16 lie detector tests taken, 5 by Travis Walton and 11 by the remaining crew, and they would all pass. The one member of that initial polygraph set, when 5 had passed and 1 was inconclusive, he was retested, the same exact test, and he did pass. It's just one of those things where we're left with this incredible story where modern technology says they're telling the truth, but we can't fit that truth into what we think of as normal life. And so we've just decided that there's going to be a group of people that believe and there's going to be a group of people that don't. And you're left to pick which side you're on. Just 30 years ago, we had not discovered a single planet outside of our solar system. Today, we've discovered over 4,500 of them, and of all those planets we're discovering, 1 in 5 of them, scientists now say, are most likely habitable. There's really 2 criteria for a planet to be considered habitable. 1, it needs to be rocky, and 2, it needs to fall into the Goldilocks zone, where it's in its star's orbit in a place where it's neither too hot or too cold, allowing water to be in liquid form. One of the best chances we have so far at finding life on another one of these habitable planets is a planet called Ross 128b. It orbits an inactive red dwarf star, meaning it's likely not being bludgeoned by solar radiation, and we've detected strange signals emanating from the nearby host star, signals that perhaps have intelligent origins. Another habitable planet is Proxima b. It also happens to be the closest habitable planet to Earth and is a lot like Ross 128b. However, the red dwarf it revolves around is much more temperamental and periodically casts out massive amounts of radiation that does make life quite difficult. It's also tidally locked and in synchronous rotation with its star, meaning one side of the planet is always facing the star and getting completely torched all the time. The other side, the dark side of the planet, never faces the star, and so everything is frozen. And so the only place liquid water could exist on Proxima b would be at the equator. Another area of the universe that scientists are focused on to try to see if there's life there right now, or could be life, is an area called the TRAPPIST-1 system. It's actually 7 different planets, all of which are considered habitable, that are orbiting around this one particular red dwarf. The really cool thing about this particular system is that the 7 planets are super close together. So close that if you were standing on one, you could look up and see all of the others, and you're so close you could actually make out geologic formations like mountains, and you could see clouds, and in theory, you could actually travel between the different planets. So imagine going on vacation to another planet. planet. But to really get you thinking, a new study just released its results this month in October 2020. They looked at all 4,500 plus planets that are outside the solar system, and they ranked them according to how likely they are to sustain life. Not whether they're currently sustaining life, but looking at their conditions of how good of a planet are they to sustain life. And out of the 4,500, there were 24 at the top of the list that not only can sustain life, but actually can sustain life better than Earth can. They are considered super habitable, and they are literally better places to live than Earth is, which is definitely a foreign concept for most people because they think of Earth as like this oasis in this vast universe where everything lined up perfectly to sustain human life. And already, just out of the 4,500 planets that were reviewed, that have only been discovered in the past 30 years, right? There's lots more planets out there. We've already found 24 that are better than Earth at sustaining life. So what happens when we discover there are millions, if not billions of planets out there? Just probability alone says there's going to be a heck of a lot more planets out there that are better at sustaining life than Earth, which really forces you to come to terms with the reality that almost certainly we are not alone. Some call this location the most paranormal location on the planet. Others call this whole thing just a big hoax. But what is undeniably true, and frankly what makes this case so much more interesting, is that unlike the vast majority of paranormal stories and claims, this case was put to an enormous amount of scientific scrutiny. In fact, there was a decade-long study done on this case, where PhDs and scientists converged on this one location and basically around the clock studied, all these claims of the paranormal that was happening in the area. And after a decade of research, the findings are pretty mind-blowing. And the case that I'm referring to is none other than the very famous Skinwalker Ranch. So the too long didn't read version of this story is you have a family that purchases a ranch out in Utah, and as soon as they move in, they start noticing some pretty bizarre things around their property. Everything from, some of their livestock going missing or being harmed. They have strange sightings in the woods of creatures and lights in the sky. They eventually report it to the news, and that news story gets picked up by a couple of other outlets. And a billionaire who is obsessed with researching the paranormal sees this story. He buys the property and installs an entire team of scientists and researchers to basically try to figure out what was happening at this ranch. And they spend 10 years studying this ranch. The outcome is, turns out some strange things really were happening there. Before we get started, if this type of content appeals to you, the kind of strange, dark, mysterious content delivered in a story format, if that appeals to you, that's what my channel's all about. And I post 3 to 4 times a week. So if that appeals to you, please gently ransack the like button and then turn on all notifications so you can get all of my content every time I upload every week. All right, on with the story. In the northeastern corner of Utah lies a 500-acre plot of land, it's all desert, where a ranch sits, and that is Skinwalker Ranch. It was built in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it was actually built on a piece of land that had apparently been cursed. Prior to its construction, the Navajo tribe had a feud with the Utes Native American tribe. The Utes were selling off other Native Americans that they would capture. They would sell them into slavery to the United States. And so the Navajo, who had previously lived in the area where this ranch actually was built, they were forced off their land as the Utes came in and were rounding them up and selling them into slavery. And before the Navajo left that area, they cursed the land with what's called the Skinwalker curse. The idea was they were going to torment the Utes tribe for the hardships they had inflicted on the Navajo. The Skinwalker curse, legend has it, is this curse where these witches descend on the area and take the form or wear the skin of various predatory animals in the area, namely large wolves and foxes. They inhabit those bodies and terrorize anybody in the cursed land. At some point, this ranch is actually built on the land that had apparently been cursed. It wasn't until many years later when owners of that ranch started seeing predatory animals doing some very strange things in and around their property that they did some research on the area, learned about this curse, and then before long the nickname had stuck. In 1994, Terry and Gwen Sherman purchased Skinwalker Ranch. It had actually been abandoned by the previous owners for the last few years, so when they purchased it, they got it for way below market price. So they are just so excited to be moving in. They breed cattle, and so they had 500 acres to let their cattle free roam. It was like the dream purchase for this family. And so when they finally do move in, like the day they move in, they don't really care that the grass is overgrown. It looks like things are kind of in disrepair. And in fact, when they go into the homestead, like the actual house on the property, they were so excited about everything that they kind of overlooked some of the strange things that they immediately noticed about the property. They go inside and every window has a deadbolt on it. The inside and outside of every door in the house, not just the doors leading outside, doors leading between rooms had locks, the front and back side. They noticed these big pikes that were driven into the ground at the front door and back door of the property with massive chains stringing off of them, which looked like pretty powerful guard dogs had been there. They're thinking to themselves, well, this is a huge piece of property. Perhaps the previous owners are a little bit paranoid because they're kind of isolated. And so they didn't really raise a red flag when, to be honest, had I moved into a property where every single door and window had multiple locks on it, they had these big guard dogs, I'd probably ask a couple questions. But you know what? Terry and Gwen, they're just so excited about this purchase that, again, they kind of just overlook it. So on the day that they are moving in, Terry and Gwen have some family members over to help them offload trucks and move stuff into the homestead. And it's during this process as they're moving things out of the truck into the house. And again, you got to remember that the house is situated like right in the middle of the property, and you can see in every direction basically unobstructed because it's basically open desert, with the exception of a couple areas that are, basically forests. And as they're offloading some of the stuff into the house, Terry looks out at one of these tree lines and he notices this huge wolf, or what looks like a wolf, pretty well off in the distance, kind of meandering its way over towards them. But it's far enough off that this is not enough to be totally worried about it. After all, Terry was a rancher and his family were fairly rugged. They carried weapons and they were used to, protecting their livestock from predators. So this was not a, oh my goodness, I can't believe a wolf is near us. It was more like, okay, let's make a note that there's a wolf walking towards us. And so Terry he tells his family, hey guys, just so you know, there's a wolf coming towards us right now. And the whole family is now standing near the truck and they're watching this wolf. And Terry recalled as he's staring out watching this wolf, it's kind of almost walking in like a snake, like a serpentine path towards them from hundreds of yards out. It's still quite a ways out. Terry notices that there was a fence that was out where this wolf is. And the fence was pretty big, and the spaces between posts were about 6 feet. When he had a good look at the wolf next to the fence, he could tell that the wolf was at least 6 feet long. And he was thinking, are my eyes playing a trick on me? Like, that's an enormous wolf. That's the biggest wolf I've ever seen. But the wolf wasn't acting angry or aggressive. It was just kind of skulking its way towards him, very nonchalant, broad daylight. And at some point, Terry and the family, they're standing behind the truck, and Terry said that they all had this feeling that the wolf was not going to harm them. And the wolf got about 100 yards away, and Terry and his family are transfixed. And he even said he didn't understand why they weren't scared or why they weren't, running away or shooting at it or something, but they didn't. All of them are just standing there watching this wolf that's massive. And the wolf is wagging its tail and acting like a domesticated dog. The wolf comes over and goes up near Terry's father, who was there helping unload some of the gear they had. And Terry's father just kind of reflexively reaches out to start petting this. He's petting like up at his head level, this massive wolf. And the wolf just acts like a domesticated dog and kind of rubs against his hand and then starts walking away from them, just wagging its tail and not doing anything, not causing them any harm, not snarling, not growling, nothing. But just as nonchalantly as it walked over to them, it walks over to where they had a pen with a couple of cows and calves inside of this pen. And one of the calves had its head through the post that was keeping them in this cage, just kind of watching this wolf. And the wolf notices it and in an instant jumps over to this calf and immediately has the whole head of the calf in its jaws, just trying to rip it out of the cage. But it can't get it to squeeze through the cage. And so all of a sudden, like Terry and his family are broken out of this weird trance, and Terry starts firing shots at the wolf. It strikes the wolf and has no impact. They run over, they start hitting it with the back end of an axe. They're trying to get this thing off of the calf because their livestock, that was their livelihood. And these are rugged people, and so they're trying to fight to save their property, to save their cows. And the wolf is just totally unaffected. It's not trying to attack Terry or his son that are trying to get rid of it. The wolf is just trying to attack the cow, but it won't let go. And finally, it just kind of gives up on the calf, starts kind of retreating. Terry ends up getting his rifle, a high-powered rifle, and takes a shot at the wolf one more time. But again, it just has no impact on the wolf. And the wolf just, at some point, just is, I guess, bored, turns around and kind of trots off into the woods. After they kind of were brought out of that initial trance, that they remembered this horrible smell, this like foul, almost chemical smell that just permeated the whole area after the wolf was there. Terry and his son, they decided to go track this wolf because now there's this massive predator that's going to make owning cattle extremely difficult, and so they would have to go deal with this predator. And so instead of retreating into the house, they grab their weapons and they track the wolf that's now jogged off into the forest. And they make it to an area in the forest where the ground is very muddy and sodden. And Terry could easily make out these footprints that just suddenly stop. And they just couldn't make sense of it. And so they went back to the house and they told their family, like, we tracked it into the woods. There's no blood trail. There's nothing. It just walked in and vanished. So this is day one of being at this ranch, and they're all on edge now. The whole family is on edge. They really don't know what to make of that wolf. The sheer size of it, the fact that it was totally unaffected by being shot multiple times. There's real concern over their own livelihood because they keep cattle and they're only going to have more that are going to be out in these pens. And if there are wolves that are 3 times the size of a normal wolf that are walking around killing cattle, that's a big problem if you own cattle. And so they're on edge, and they're all in a way trying almost not to talk about how crazy and how bizarre that encounter with the wolf was. They're just like, they're treating it like it's just a normal predator problem. Like, man, we gotta get those wolves, we gotta protect our cattle. But in the back of everybody's minds, they're like, something very strange is happening here. Gwen, she was having some other very strange things that were happening to her that she was not tying to the wolf thing. She was just noticing a couple of distinct things that were happening to her that made her think that she actually had a very real, medical problem, that she had true memory issues. Because 2 things happened. One, in that first week, she had gone to the grocery store, and when she came back, she put the groceries away, and then she left to go to the other room. And when she came back, all the groceries were now back in the bags. And so for 20 minutes, she's just sitting there dumbfounded with, did I put the groceries away? Same day, she goes to take a shower, and she hangs her towel in the bathroom like anyone would, and she takes a shower, and then when she gets out, the towel's missing. And she's like, she gets another towel and she towels off, and then she finds the towel hanging up in a closet on the other side of the house. And so between the groceries and the towel, she's like, is there something wrong with me? Am I having a stroke? Am I having a medical issue here that I'm literally losing my mind? And it wasn't until Terry actually had a similar experience that she started to wonder if this had to do with maybe the strangeness with the wolf, that maybe there's just something odd happening about this property. And it was Terry, in that first week, he had been digging holes for a new fence. And he had this big fence digging tool. It was about 70 pounds that he was using to dig the holes for the fence. And so he had taken a break after making a bunch of posts for this fence. He took a break, left his fence digging tool, at the last place he had dug a post, and he went in to grab a bite to eat, came back out, and his fence digger is missing. And initially he just goes into the house and he's like, hey, to his wife, to his kids, did you guys move my fence digger? Do you know what happened to it? Where is it? It's not out there. And they're like, no, we've been in the house the whole time. I have no idea. And so they couldn't find it. And a week goes by, and he's out patrolling his property looking for wolves. And in the tree like well away from where he had been digging the post before, in the tree, his fence digging tool that's 70 pounds is like 70 feet in the air, strung up in this tree. So Terry comes back to the house and he tells his family about the fence digging tool being in the tree. And that's when Gwen tells Terry about her experiences with the groceries going back in the bag and a towel being moved around the house. And everybody in the family starts to really start being scared. We can't explain what's happening on this property, and we're very isolated. And what's the deal with all these locks on all the doors? I mean, they're starting to feel really concerned. Following the fence digging tool being found, Terry started to notice lights on his property. Initially, because this was the first couple of weeks they're there, he would see lights way at the far end of his property that looked like headlights, and he would think someone must have made a wrong turn that wound up on my property. I mean, we're kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and they'll just leave. And so when he first started seeing these lights, that's what he assumed it was, just people making a wrong turn. But he started to see it so often that he wondered if people were illegally hunting on his property. And so one night he sees these lights on his property and he goes out to investigate. In fact, he's angry. He's had all these strange things happen. His family's on edge, and now he's mad and he's going to take it out on this person who's illegally hunting on his property. And he starts charging out to these lights and he starts getting closer and closer, and he starts to realize it's not making any sound. If this was like a truck, it's not making any sound. And we're in an area where I could totally hear that if it was a vehicle, and he can't hear anything. And as he gets closer and closer, the lights start retreating from him without making a sound, and then float up into the sky and disappear. And Terry's like, what is going on here? The winter rolls around, and it's a particularly brutal winter. And one night he couldn't account for one of his cows, and so he's out looking for this one stray cow, and he searches his whole property, and there's only one area that he hasn't searched, and it's that forest where that giant wolf had disappeared after marching in there, and they tracked it in there. And so he goes in there, and as soon as he gets to the tree line, he notices there's a bunch of footprints from what looks like a cow. And he's relieved because it's probably his. He follows it into the woods, and much like the wolf that had just disappeared in that muddy, sodden area in the forest, in the same spot, the footprints that appeared to be this cow had also just disappeared. And then over the course of the remainder of the winter, that would happen 4 more times. The animals would run away and just disappear without a trace. By the end of the winter, after all these animals have just mysteriously disappeared, Terry and his family, but Terry in particular, has really gone into full paranoia mode. He, at night, would just stalk his own property, hiding behind bushes with his weapon, and hope to see what was taking his cattle. And so one night, as he's doing another fruitless search around his property, he catches out of his periphery what looks like a kind of mass of something moving around in the trees near his property. And at this point, he was kind of obscured by some shrubs and some plants. And so he kind of crouched down and looked out at the tree line. And he sees in the tree line this strange shape kind of moving about inside of the trees. And he would describe the mass as looking almost like a stealth fighter jet, but really small. And it was making no sound, and it was hovering about 20 feet off the ground. And he's crouched down, not making a sound, watching it. And it's just kind of moving around the tree line, and it has these lights that looks to be kind of scanning the ground. And it's just kind of moving around, it's shining these lights, these multicolored lights in the ground, and Terry moves a tiny bit to get a better angle on this thing. And he makes the tiniest of noises against the brush, just like a tiny little, barely audible sound. And this mass that's pretty far away, the lights immediately turn off, and it angles itself so it's facing directly at Terry. And Terry can feel it right away that it's heard this tiny little sound he's made, and now it's staring directly at Terry. And Terry's terrified, and he's looking at this thing, wondering oh my God, is it gonna come take me? What is this? Is this the thing that's been taking my livestock? And he's terrified, and he's staring at it, and it just flies away. By the spring of 1995, things have gotten really, really bad for Terry and his family. Now, not only are they losing livestock inexplicably, but they're showing up. The actual cows themselves are showing up back on their property, hours or days later, just kind of in random locations on the property, and they look like they've had surgery done, like precision cuts, and pieces of them are missing. And in addition, some very strange things are happening at the house. At night, they would see these entities walking around their property, these humanoid. They described them as having no expression, just walking around their property. And sometimes they would walk right up to the glass, put their hands on the glass and look in, but there was no face. And like Terry and his family, they had blinds down and they would use the deadbolts on every single door and window, but they could hear them rapping at the glass and they could hear them communicating in a language they didn't understand right outside of their house. And this became so regular that it was almost impossible to sleep. Terry's kids started performing very poorly in school because they weren't sleeping. Terry's wife, Gwen, she lost her job at the bank because she wasn't sleeping and she was like delusional. They were all just at an absolute breaking point. Terry is now feeling totally disheartened. One night he's sitting on his porch with his rifle and he notices out on the horizon a new phenomenon. He was used to seeing the lights on his property that would be off in the distance that would disappear, and he had previously seen that kind of like fighter jet thing that was scanning the area. Like, those were two types of lights he would see, but there was a new light he saw as he's sitting on his porch. It was almost like this orangey orb that appeared off in the distance. Since he had his rifle with a high-powered scope on it, he just lifts up his rifle and he looks through his high-powered scope and he zooms in all the way, and he can see that this orb, he describes it as a portal. That as he's looking at it, it has almost like an oval shape to it, and even though it was nighttime, in the middle of the orange orb is this blue sky. It's as if he's looking through a portal into another world where it's broad daylight and there's a sky. And he doesn't know what to make of it, but he can see that a black figure is crawling out of this portal into his property. And it looks just like the black entities that were basically walking around his property at night. In addition to these figures that are crawling, like imagine that scene from The Ring where the girl crawls out of the well. They're crawling out of this portal into his property and then scurrying away into the tree line. And he sees weird craft as well coming into his property through this portal, and then the portal shuts and disappears. Following this night with the orange portal, Terry started to notice blue orbs that he and his family would say were the worst and most terrifying thing of all of the things they experienced. And considering they had tall, featureless black humanoids peering in their windows and rapping on their windows, that's saying something, okay? So a blue orb started showing up on their property. And the way they described it, Terry and his family, was whenever the orb came near you, it gave you this extreme sense of anxiety. It was almost like it was emitting this feeling that you automatically got where suddenly you were unbelievably anxious and terrified of the blue orb. And then as soon as it left, you would, not be anxious anymore. And so one night he's sitting on his porch like he had begun doing, and he sees this orb show up on his property, and his 3 dogs are sitting with him that see the orb, and they start growling and barking, and so he lets his dogs go, thinking that maybe they can scare this thing off. And the dogs take off running towards this blue orb, and they chase it, and you can see the orb, Terry can see the orb that starts to kind of retreat, and he's thinking, oh my goodness, I finally won something. My attack dogs are going to scare this orb away. And they chase off into the woods, and he sees this thing, the blue orb, retreat into the woods. And then when he's thinking again that finally a little victory for us, he hears his dogs yelping, and he's too terrified to go check it out. And so he ends up going inside and locking the doors, locking the windows like they had been, and just kind of retreating. So the next day, when the dogs haven't returned, Terry and his son, they go out looking for the dogs in the forest. And when they get out there, they get to a clearing and they find 3 stacks of ashes in like little burned out circles, as if there had been a fire previously in these 3 little spots. And it turned out it was the ashes of his 3 dogs that had gone into the woods. They had just been vaporized. Terry decides that it's time to leave, and he wants to sell the ranch. And so he puts the property up for sale and goes to a local news outlet, and he tells them about what's happening on his property. And as fate would have it, a billionaire by the name of Robert Bigelow, who had invested millions of dollars in standing up this scientific research team, this all-star team of PhDs, specifically to research what he described as high strangeness, which really is just paranormal. Basically, he was obsessed with the paranormal and wanted to investigate the paranormal. And he had actually seen that fairly obscure story when he saw that it was up for sale. Robert Bigelow, the billionaire, saw this great opportunity to buy the piece of property and actually make it the headquarters of his own scientific research team, not only to investigate what was happening on Skinwalker Ranch, but use it as kind of a hub to do other scientific research. So he purchases the ranch, and Terry actually, even though he did not want to spend any time at the ranch, on some level wanted to know what the research was going to show, because he was very curious, like, what is going on at this ranch that's been plaguing my family. So he offers to stay on as kind of like the ranch manager, because, you know, Robert Bigelow and his team are a bunch of scientists and business people. They don't have any experience on the ranch, and so they're happy to keep him. So Terry is still connected to the ranch, but at this point he's sold it to Robert Bigelow. So Robert Bigelow's scientific team was called the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS, N-I-D-S, NIDS for short. And Bigelow had actually built the team before purchasing Skinwalker Ranch. And what he went out and did is he recruited some of the most incredible scientists and PhDs he could possibly recruit, but he didn't want people that were interested in the paranormal. He wanted people that were inherently skeptical, so that if he was ever able to kind of prove the existence of high strangeness, that he would have credibility in doing that. And so he went out and found these incredibly skeptical, incredibly smart scientists and PhDs. And so they move into Skinwalker Ranch, and the first thing they do is they need to start doing testing to make sure that this whole all the stories about Skinwalker Ranch coming from Terry and his family were not just some grand illusion by the family, that, you know, they could have just made it up. And so they get in there and they start running these tests. So that first year, as they're running these tests, which are largely things like, okay, let's check the environment and see if there aren't any, you know, plants that are giving off spores that could be hallucinogenic that they're breathing in. Let's check their water supply and make sure there wasn't something happening in their water supply. Let's do psychological assessments of the family. Let's ask neighbors. Let's do all of our diligence to make sure it's not something environmental or psychological. And over that first year, while they're doing this research, there isn't much activity at the ranch, save a couple of instances where there were some strange lights. So that first year is fairly uneventful, but what's important is that the NIDS researchers come to a conclusion that this did not seem like a hallucination. This did not seem like a something coming from, you know, a plant or water supply. This seemed like the Terry and his family were really experiencing something odd. They just didn't know what it was. One day, Terry and actually Gwen, who was helping him, were tagging some of the new calves, the new cows that had been born, putting these little tags in their ears. And so Gwen was there helping. And so Terry and Gwen, they tagged this new calf, put a yellow tag in its ear, and they move on and they're tagging other animals. And so for about 40 minutes, their eyes and their attention are not focused on this one calf or that one area of the ranch. They're tagging other animals, and then their dog that was with them starts growling and reacting in the direction of where this calf had been. And so Terry and Gwen turn around and they look and they don't see anything, and they start walking over. They find the calf that they had tagged about 40 minutes ago has been basically surgically dissected, and all that's left are its legs and its head. And in addition, the ear where that tag was had been removed. And so they immediately call over the NIDS researchers. So the NIDS veterinarian comes over and looks at the scene and just can't make sense of it, because the incisions on the calf were so well done that it looked like someone with real surgical expertise had done this on an operating table. There was no sign that this was done by a predator, and there was no blood anywhere. So this prompts a massive search of the property, because in many ways, this is what the NIDS researchers are looking for, are real occurrences of something that is highly strange that they can go investigate. And so all of the researchers and everybody there begins searching the property for whoever was responsible for this dissection of the cow. And they start searching the property, and the dogs they had all these guard dogs that were kept at each of these observation posts that they had set up around the ranch as soon as the NIDS team had moved in. They were all looking in the same direction, all four of these four observation posts, and they're all cowering in the back of their cages, all looking in the same direction. And so they start making their way towards the tree line where all these dogs are looking, and they stop short when Terry says, "I see something in the tree." So they stop their car and they're looking, and in the tree is this massive wolf, this like wolf-like humanoid that's basically perched on a tree limb. And Terry takes out his rifle and he aims at the creature up in the tree, this huge creature, and everybody sees it. All the NIDS researchers are looking at this creature and they're like, "Oh my God, what is that?" Terry starts firing at this thing and it just disappears into the woods. And so the team charges into the woods, they fan out, and they pick up a couple of tracks of this huge thing that has like this massive footprint with these huge claws. But much like the wolf that had disappeared and the cattle that had suddenly disappeared when they went into the woods, they couldn't find any traces of this thing. But they did smell this horrible stench that Terry remembered smelling. It stuck with him that first day when that large wolf had come over on the very first day they were moving in. It was that same smell, but they couldn't find this huge animal. So dumbfounded, the NIDS researchers just go back to the property and no one can make sense of it. And you know, they have the footprint and they have their own eyewitness testimony, but like they couldn't make sense of how something that big could just get away. And so over the following month, they're like searching the property and they're looking for any more signs of this huge creature or anything. The only thing they noticed is that the guard dogs consistently stayed in their kennels and did not want to come out. They were acting like they were kind of being hunted, and they were they were cowering quite a bit and they were scared to go out in the open, but they couldn't find anything. So it was around this time that Terry and Gwen are kind of back to doing work around the ranch, and one day they're driving off to one section of the ranch and they pass by the corral where 4 of their prized bulls were. These are very expensive animals that are all in this enclosure, and so they drive past and they take a mental note that they're seeing these bulls in this enclosure, and they drive off to the other side of the ranch where they're doing some work, you know, tagging animals and, you know, building fences, whatever it is they were doing. But when they come back and they round a corner where they're first able to see that corral of bulls again, they are like, where are they? Because the bulls were not in their enclosure and they weren't anywhere. And so they're panicked because these are very expensive animals, and they run over, and Terry sees that the gates to the corral are still locked, but there's no bulls in there. There's no sign of a struggle or anything. And it just so happens that right next to the corral was this fairly small trailer that hadn't been used in years. In fact, it was literally wired shut. It was just sitting there. And Terry, just for whatever reason, runs over and looks in one of the windows. And inside of this tiny enclosure are these 4 bulls, completely calm, all crammed into this tiny trailer. They could barely fit. They're not fighting with each other or anything. They're just calmly sitting there as if they're in some kind of a trance. And Terry yells to Gwen, like, "Hey, they're over here. They're right here." And it like startles the bulls out of their trance. They start panicking and kicking, and they end up getting them out of this enclosure, and it takes them hours to finally round them up and get them back in the corral. But you know, they're unharmed. But it is almost impossible to get even one bull into that small of an enclosure. It would take hours to maybe be successful at doing that. To get 4 bulls into that enclosure was pretty much impossible. And to do it when they basically were calm after they were in there is also somewhat impossible. And it was important to note that Terry saw when he looked in the window that the only entrance to that trailer was wired shut still. It had not been undone. In fact, the cobwebs at the corner where the opening basically formed with the sides of the trailer, they were still intact, like it had not opened. And it made no sense how those bulls got in there. And so the NIDS researchers come over and they can't make sense of it either. Upon further investigation, the NIDS researchers found that the bars of the corral that held the bulls, a section of it had been highly magnetized. And so while they're doing this research, trying to figure out if magnetic fields has anything to do with the strange occurrences at the ranch, Two of the NIDS researchers were on the outskirts of the property using their compass to look for magnetic fields, and they started smelling. They both reported smelling that horrible metallic, like rotting smell that other people had reported smelling anytime they saw that large wolf creature. And when they started smelling it, their compass started to flitter and then pointed away from north towards wherever the smell was. And they remember thinking that they felt like they were being watched. And it went on for a few moments, and their compass didn't waver. It was aimed in the direction of the smell, and they're both on opposite sides, pointing in the same direction. And then at some point, the smell stops, and they stop feeling anxious, and the north arrows go back to the way they should have been. And then one of the most terrifying of all of the paranormal occurrences that happened at Skinwalker Ranch happened at the very end of 1997. Two NIDS researchers were up on a ridgeline overlooking the homestead. Every night it became commonplace to basically position NIDS researchers all over the property to basically be on the lookout for weird things that are happening. And these two researchers are up on this ridge, kind of obscured and hidden, and they see this orange orb take shape right near the homestead. And one of them had infrared goggles, and so he looks down at the orb, and he can clearly make out that it's this oval-shaped opening that sounded an awful lot like what Terry had seen on his porch when he saw that humanoid creature crawling out of the portal into his property. Well, these two researchers are looking at this portal, and they see the same thing. They see this black human-like creature crawling out of this orange portal onto the ground, and then it starts running up the hill towards them. And they're like frozen with fear. They start smelling that horrible rotting metallic smell as this big human-like creature bounds up the mountain, and they can hear the shale under its feet as it runs up, and it goes right past them. About 30 feet away from them, they're looking at it, and it just barrels past them at a full sprint up into the mountainside. The following year, in 1998, the activity on the ranch declined significantly. All they had was the occasional strange lights here and there, but for the most part it was done. And in fact, even though NIDS remained on the property, by 2004, the research just wasn't amounting to anything, so they pulled the plug on the operation. They did have footage of a number of the lights that were seen, but again, no one's gonna take a picture of some random lights and say, oh, there you go, proof. You know, they demonstrated that there were, magnetic fields, and they have images of these calves that would reappear after looking like they'd had surgery done to them. They had hundreds of eyewitness reports. They have all this information, but none of it was really definitive proof, which was very frustrating to Robert Bigelow, to Terry and his family. And the way they described it is they felt like they were dealing with an entity or a group of entities that were just consistently one step ahead of them, that they could catch glimpses of what they were doing, but it was never enough to really understand what was happening. They never felt like they were in control. It was always clear that this entity or these entities were in control of the situation, and they never were in a good position to really record hard data or get good footage. Not to mention, this is 1998, this is the late 90s. No one just had an iPhone they can pull out and snap pictures. You had real cameras. And so the best they could do was some pictures of light and some of the animals that had been mutilated. There's been numerous books put together by some of the people that were a part of this NIDS research team, and to this day they believe that what they saw was a result of some paranormal activity. And to this day, many people believe that this is one of the most credible instances of paranormal activity occurring. There is a taboo that is held in the scientific and academic communities, as well as in government, news media, and all modern institutions. And that taboo is on taking UFOs seriously. As a result of this societal conditioning, many people simply don't believe in UFOs. And those same people will view others that do believe in UFOs or who are open-minded to it as the crazy people, when in reality, UFOs are blatantly real. I mean, blatantly so. And they've been whipping around Earth for some time. But because of that taboo, scientists and politicians, they don't want to do the research to figure out why they're here, because it's career suicide. And what's worse is there's all sorts of programs, like I'm going to tell you about in a minute, that are designed to keep people conditioned to believe that everything is ponies and rainbows, and there's no aliens, there's no UFOs, there's no anything but Earth. In 1952, a CIA group group called the Psychological Strategy Board concluded that the people in the United States are prone to mass hysteria when it comes to UFOs, and that we should be actively debunking any organization or person or group that is trying to get to the bottom of UFOs or other unexplained phenomenon. It seems like the reasoning behind this was to protect the public from themselves. They did not want the public to discover something as momentous as the discovery of a UFO that is connected to extraterrestrials or some other unexplained phenomenon. They didn't want the public to discover that. They wanted the government to make that discovery so it could be controlled, the narrative could be controlled, and they could protect the public from falling into mass hysteria. Now, while we don't know if the government actually listened to this recommendation and began aggressively censoring any group or organization that was trying to get answers about UFOs, what we do know is that the government at the same time was investing real money to do their own research about UFOs. In December of 2017, the Pentagon had to come out and confirm the existence of a particular program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program after 2 of their videos had been leaked. This highly classified, highly controversial government-funded program investigated UFOs. The 2 leaked videos were filmed by American service members, pilots, when they saw these objects that were flying around Earth that were demonstrating what this program described as advanced physics, which is basically things humans haven't figured out how to do yet. The objects were able to accelerate with g-forces that were too much for the human body to withstand. They could reach hypersonic speeds with no sonic boom and no heat trail. They also seemed to resist Earth's gravitational pull despite not looking particularly aerodynamic enough to have lift or thrust. Metamaterials that came from these UFOs were made up of materials that you can't find naturally on Earth and would be extremely expensive to replicate. According to a Pentagon briefing this group gave in 2009 about all of their research into UFOs, they concluded that the United States would not be able to protect itself against some of the technology they had discovered. And these 2 videos that we're seeing are only the ones that were leaked. And in April of 2020, the Pentagon came out and officially confirmed those 2 leaked videos from 2017 were authentic, and to this day, the crafts or objects that were spotted in those videos are still listed as unidentified. They wouldn't say that unless they made sure it was not just another military craft or some other conventional explanation, meaning, really, we don't know what these things are. Here are the 2 video clips.
Echo 6-1 Tango, Roger, over. Roger, there's troubleshooting.
Did you box moving target?
No, I took an auto track.
Oh, okay.
Oh my gosh, dude.
Wow, look at it fly!
Dude, this is a drone, bro.
There's a whole fleet of them, look on the ASA.
My gosh.
They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not.
That is the LNS, dude.
Well, if there's like...
Look at that thing.
Late one night in the summer of 1977, a large radio telescope in Ohio intercepted a very unique signal. The telescope was searching the sky on behalf of an organization called SETI, which is the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and the signal, although it only lasted 72 seconds, fit the profile of a message beamed to us from another world. Jerry Amon, who was a project scientist for SETI, was flipping through some of the computer printouts generated by the telescope when he noticed a series of letters. Now, the way this particular radio telescope worked is it pretty much constantly picked up a signal, but that signal was a very low background hum of static. And that was represented in 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those low numbers are representative of that basic background sound that they just write off. It doesn't matter. Occasionally, the telescope would pick up a higher number on the readout, like a 7, an 8, a 9, and even above that, it transitions to letters to represent louder radio signals. But all of those higher signals had a rational explanation. Either they were anomalous or they were tied to something very natural and ordinary. But that particular night in 1977, as the telescope swept across the sky, it picked up a signal that was so strong it surged past 0 through 9 and made its way into the letters all the way up to letter U, and it held it for 72 seconds, representing a signal that was 30 times stronger than what this telescope normally picks up as its baseline. And after those 72 seconds, the telescope eventually passed it, and that signal dropped all the way back down. So when Amon saw this amazing string of letters representing this radio signal, he circled it in red ink and wrote next to it, "Wow!" exclamation point. And from that point forward, this transmission became the WOW signal. One of the main reasons the WOW signal was not immediately cast out as some anomaly or chalked up to some other natural occurrence is because of what we understand about radio wave transmission. The goal of this radio telescope was to try to pick up radio signals coming in from other worlds. And so the way they did that is they opened up a whole bunch of different channels, receivers, they had 50 of them, and anytime they were aiming their dish in a direction of the sky, if there was any radio waves coming towards them, they tried to capture them on different radio frequencies. If you were aiming your antenna in a direction where natural radio waves were coming towards you, it would hit one channel and then diffuse over adjacent channels because it's not a targeted radio wave. It's natural. It's more like a shotgun blast. Non-natural radio waves, like the ones we're familiar with when we listen to the radio, listen to music, those are targeted radio waves, meaning when they were sent out in a very narrow band. They were sent out on a single frequency, and only people that have turned to that particular frequency or that particular receiver are going to hear your message. That is a non-natural radio wave. The night that the WOW signal was picked up, it was only picked up on one channel. It did not diffuse over the others, meaning the WOW signal is not natural and was created by someone or something. And for the SETI researchers that are literally combing the sky for signs of extraterrestrial life, this is exactly what they were looking for. It is what an intelligent life form would do to try to communicate. They would use one radio frequency to demonstrate this is intentional. But despite decades of professional and amateur astronomers searching the sky for this WOW signal, it's never been found again. While there's many theories about what could have caused the WOW signal, obviously ranging from extraterrestrial life to a comet that passed by in 1977 that we only recently knew about, to a secret spy satellite, the bottom line is, to this day, we cannot adequately explain it. It remains the best evidence of alien communication ever obtained.